The United States versus Billie Holiday was primarily set during the height of Holiday's career in the latter part of the legendary jazz singer's career up until her death in 1959. The movie draws on Johann Hari's bestseller, Chasing the Scream, The First and Last Days of the War on Drugs, which tells stories about the early days of the war on drugs and those caught up in that fight. The movie touches specifically on the chapter about federal agents who targeted Billie Holiday, and although the movie's timeline jumps between different points in her life and career, it mostly focuses on Billie Holiday's battle with the United States government and Harry Anslinger, the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, over her efforts to sing Strange Fruit, a song about lynchings in the South. The attempts to suppress her by targeting her for her drug use. Throughout the movie, Holiday grapples with the weight of these legal troubles, her past which contributed to her drug use, and engages in a romance with Jimmy Fletcher, the black FBN agent who tracked her, and she rises up to be a key figure in the early days of the civil rights movement. Welcome, I'm Country Boy from the One Mic Black History Podcast, and this is a special episode of the One Mic Black History Podcast that I like to call Hollywood versus Black History. So today I'm going to talk about the United States versus Billie Holiday and talk about some of the facts and the fictions about the movie. If you like this, enjoy this, please, you can find more Black History at onemichistory.com. And if you want to support this podcast, please donate to our Patreon page on onemichistory.com. Hit support and please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Without further ado, let's get started. Is it a coincidence that Andrea Day, the actress that plays Billie Holiday in the movie, has a similar name to Lady Day? Andrea Day is a stage name that the actress chose as a homage to Billie Holiday's nickname, Lady Day. Andrea Day is born Cassandra Monique Bate, and Billie Holiday herself was born Eleanor Fagan. She took the name Billie Holiday from the actress Billy Dove. Is Billie Holiday accurately portrayed in the movie? Well, not exactly. Director Lee Daniels told The Hollywood Reporter that the United States versus Billie Holiday is not a biopic. It's difficult for anyone to attempt to chronicle an authoritative life of Billie Holiday because those documents don't exist. The witnesses have lied, and Billie herself would tell the same story many different ways. Still, there are chronicles of Billie Holiday's life from this period which the movie was able to reference and figure out. Director Lee Daniels said that he wanted to focus on the last decade of Billie Holiday's life and her role as a civil rights hero because it had been glossed over in the 1972 film about her, Lady Sings the Blues, starring Diana Ross, even though that film offered a more well-rounded depiction of the singer. Depicting Holiday as merely a victim is a misrepresentation of her life. While her abuse and addiction certainly played a part, it never defined her. Friends stated that she was a fighter and did what she wanted to do, making the decision to live her life recklessly, part because she enjoyed it. The movie also skims over the part of her life as a very creative and highly talented musician. The focus of the movie had been so narrowed that the happier parts of her life and personality had been almost entirely omitted. And not only is her artistic spark absent, but her sense of humor in general. Instead, we get a mostly miserable Billie Holiday who was plagued with heroin addiction and alcoholism, and flashbacks show her being abused by men and life in general. How did Billie Holiday become a singer? After her and her mother moved to New York, Billie would walk around Harlem in search of employment. She stopped at a place called the Log Cabin. She asked them if she could perform as a dancer. After showing them a few moves, it was clear that her dancing skills were not worthy of payment. She grew desperate and asked the owner if she could try singing instead. They walked over to the old piano in the corner, and he told her to give her something to play, and she requested Traveling All Alone, and Billie Holiday was born. Are Miss Freddy and Reginald Lord Devine based on real people? Early in the movie, Billie Holiday is accompanied by her stylist, Miss Freddy, who is played by Miss Lawrence, and sits down for an interview with radio journalist Reginald Devine, played by Leslie Jordan. Neither of these characters are real, although Daniel told Variety that Reginald Devine is based on a fusion of Quentin Crisp and Skip E. Lowe. Devine sets up a flashback to February 1947 when Holiday was performing at the New York's Cafe Society Club. Did Lester Young exist? Yep, Lester Young was played by Tyler James Williams in the movie, and he was an American jazz tenor saxophonist and occasional clarinetist, coming to prominence as a member of Count Basie's orchestra. Lester Young and Holiday had a strictly platonic relationship, and he gave Holiday the nickname Lady Day, and she would give him the nickname Prez as her way of saying that she thought he was the greatest. Did Billie Holiday have a sexual relationship with Tallulah Bankhead? She absolutely did. Billie Holiday's bisexuality and her relationship with Tallulah Bankhead is barely touched upon in the film. We see Billie Holiday and Tallulah Bankhead, played by Natasha Lyonne, go for a walk in the park. In real life, they were reported to have an intense and stormy relationship in the late 1940s. Bankhead even tried personally to intervene with J. Edgar Hoover to exonerate Holiday from her drug charges that were strangling her career, and their relationship ended due to the same source of pressure that prompted Bankhead to insist that she be kept out of Holiday's autobiography, Lady Sings the Blues. Bankhead feared that it would ruin her career. The history of Strange Fruit. In the movie, it makes it clear that Holiday has been fighting for some time over Strange Fruit and to retain it as a part of her set list. Holiday is shown singing Strange Fruit a few times in the United States versus Billie Holiday. The first attempt is thwarted early in the movie and leaves her being dragged off stage by authorities as the crowd protests, and later she's able to sing the song uninterrupted. In reality, though, Strange Fruit was recorded in 1939, and she first performed it at the Integrated Cafe Society nightclub that same year. The lyrics of Strange Fruit were written by Amir Mulpol, an educator and anti-racist activist. It was adopted from a 1937 poem entitled Bitter Fruit. The poem is written by Mulpol and published in the Teachers Union Journal. The poem is inspired by a photograph of a 1930 lynching of Abram Smith and Thomas Swift in Marion, Indiana. Mirpol set his poem to music himself and initially performed in social settings with his wife and friends. Eventually, this spread around New York, and both the poem and the song were meant to draw attention to the horrors of lynching of African Americans in this country. The song was so closely aligned to Holiday throughout her career that she sought to perform it. The Cafe Society founder, Barney Josephson, even developed a set of rules that ensured the power of the song was fully transferred to its audience. Those rules included performing Strange Fruit as the final song of her set and any waiting service being stopped as the song began. The war on drugs. In the movie, the United States war on drugs is at the heart of the conflict of the United States versus Billie Holiday. Anslinger, played by Garrett Hedlund, is represented as a nasty racist bureaucrat, indulging in racism with his white co-workers, railing against jazz music scene and what is believed to be the corrupting influence, and seeking out every opportunity to arrest Holiday and make an example out of her. The initiative is led by Anslinger, and Holiday's career is frequently interrupted by encounters by the feds with an attempt to plant drugs on her as a means to stop her from singing and put her behind bars for good. Anslinger is a bit of a boogeyman in the movie, popping up to remind Holiday as well as the viewers that he is always watching. In reality, Anslinger was indeed the head of the Treasury Department's Federal Bureau of Narcotics during the time period covered in the movie, and because of this role, Anslinger would have been a key figure in the war on drugs. The effort to decriminalize drugs after decades of widespread recreational and medicinal use now recognized as a reason to target black communities. The biggest change in the movie, though, is that Garrett Hedlund is a lot younger than the actual Anslinger at the time this movie took place. Anslinger Anslinger was born in 1892 and would have been in his mid-50s, early 60s during the time period covered in the movie, and Garrett Hudler's version of Anslinger is in his mid-30s in the United States versus Billie Holiday. Was Harry Anslinger racist? Absolutely. As detailed in Johann Hari's book Chasing the Scream, The First and Last Days of the War on Drugs, Anslinger is an outspoken in his regard to his racist views. And after taking charge of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, he eventually changed his position on marijuana, which was previously viewed as a harmless nuisance that did not lead to violent crime. Soon he found himself arguing the opposite position, mainly because he believed that African Americans and Mexican immigrants that were using it much more than white people, and in turn he saw these minorities as the biggest threat to America. Anslinger warned the House Committee of the danger, telling a story that he had heard about colored students at the University of Minnesota partying with white females, gaining their sympathy with stories of racial persecution, and the result was pregnancy. He would continue to push this reasoning, warning that marijuana caused blacks to forget their appropriate racial barriers, resulting in their lusting for white women being unleashed. In an official memo, he called a black suspect a nigger, which prompted the senator of Pennsylvania to call for Anslinger's resignation. In another instance, one of his few black agents complained about fellow agents calling him a nigger, and Anslinger had the agent fired. In internal memos, Anslinger described jazz music as sounding like the jungles in the dead of night, and he said that jazz music got its horrible sound because musicians were under the influence of marijuana and that they reeked of filth. After getting nowhere targeting jazz musicians in general, he would narrow down his focus to a single target, Billie Holiday. He set out to destroy the legendary singer while letting white stars who battle heroin addiction off the hook. For example, Judy Garland was simply advised to take longer hiatuses between movies, telling her studio that she didn't have a drug problem at all. Billie Holiday's arrest. In the movie, Holiday is sent to jail for 1 year. It begins with the arrest by Jimmy Fletcher, who weaseled into her dressing room while undercover in an attempt to get closer to her. Following their conversations, Holiday is removed from stage in the 1947 performance. The next scenes, the movie depicts Holiday at Joe Guy's apartment in New York after the performance, where she is apprehended by a group of federal agents led by Fletcher. In reality, Holiday's life is broken up with frequent run-ins with the law from an early age. During Holiday's childhood, she spent a brief time in a workhouse after her and her mother had been arrested for a brothel raid where Holiday was being trafficked. As an adult, she was forced off stage after singing Strange Fruit in Philadelphia's Earl Theater in May of 1947. After Billie's performance at the Earl, her hotel room was raided, but the raid actually took place in Philadelphia at the Atticus Hotel, where she did actually strip naked to show up being taken into custody. But she also peed on the floor in protest, but that detail was luckily left out of the film. Her Carnegie Hall comeback. Holiday's Carnegie Hall comeback is a major event in the first half of the United States versus Billie Holiday. Taking place in 1948 after Holiday's release from prison, the prestigious Carnegie Hall concert meant to put Holiday back on the map. In reality, in March of 1948, the Carnegie Hall performance was a major highlight of Holiday's career, as well as a major turning point. The set list of that night performance remains intact and is available to check out thanks to Carnegie Hall. A look at the set list confirms that Holiday did in fact sing Strange Fruit, as well as her hits Body and Soul, All of Me, and God Bless the Child. The March 27th concert included 16 songs total, including an introduction from radio personality Fred Robbins. Did Billie Holiday lose her cabaret's license? Absolutely. When Billie Holiday got out of prison, she was stripped of her cabaret license. Being a convict, the government reasoned that listening to her might damage the public's morality. As a result, she was no longer able to perform where alcohol was being served. This meant that no New York City jazz clubs. She still was able to perform at alcohol-free venues like cafes and auditoriums, including several times at Carnegie Hall, where, unlike in the film, she did perform the song Strange Fruit. She also reunited with Lester Young in the 1957 CBS special The Sound of Jazz. However, to a large degree, the government had for the most part stripped her of her livelihood, and in the end she had so little money she could barely take care of herself, and she couldn't even rent an apartment in her own name. Simply paying for food was a challenge. The love life of Billie Holiday. In the movie, the roller coaster of Billie Holiday's love life is prominent in the events of the United States versus Billie Holiday. This is partial in an attempt to show Holiday's self-abusive behavior. The movie presents scenes of Holiday's childhood with her mother, a sex worker, sending Holiday to work in neighboring brothels despite the fact that she was an adolescent. The implications here is that from a very young age, she was set up to fail when it came to following love. And because of this, her choice in men is explained to her seeking out what she knows. Over the movie's 2-hour runtime, we meet 3 men, which become her husband. The first, which is James Monroe, the second being Joe Guy, and the last being Louis McKay. There is a brief romance with Jimmy Fletcher while Holiday is on tour in the late 1940s. In reality, Holiday did actually have 3 husbands: Monroe, Guy, and McKay. Each marriage lasted a few years. She was married to McKay at the time of her death in July 1947 at 44 years old. In Hari's book notes that her marriage to McKay in particular was very abusive, and he was roped in by the feds to get her arrested on drug charges. While this depiction of Holiday's married life with each one of the husbands is relatively accurate, there are some questions about her relationship with Jimmy Fletcher. In reality, Holiday and Fletcher were close and possibly romantically involved, but there is no record exists confirming this. Harper's Bazaar broke down the history of Holiday and Fletcher, stating that they did in fact spend time together and had long conversations. Also in Johann Hari's book, he writes that Fletcher and Holiday ended up dancing at Club Ebony, and years later, Agent Jimmy Fletcher said that Holiday was the type that make anyone sympathetic because she was the loving type. In a rare interview, Fletcher also expresses regret for his role in Holiday's repeated persecution. Based on this scant tiny bits of evidence, Hari theorized that Fletcher had fallen in love with Holiday, and the movie embraces this line from the book and interprets this as a passionate affair. Can the government be blamed for Billie Holiday's death? At the age of 44, Billie Holiday collapsed in the apartment of a young musician named Frankie Freedom. After being taken to the Knickerbocker Hotel in Manhattan but being turned away because she was a drug addict, paramedics recognized her and took her to the Metropolitan Hotel. She had cirrhosis of the liver from alcoholism. She was emaciated from not eating, had respiratory and cardiac problems from constantly smoking, and ulcers on her legs from injecting heroin. Harry Anslinger's narcotic agents showed up and handcuffed her to the bed, claiming that they had found more than 1/8 of an ounce of heroin in a tinfoil envelope that had been hanging from a nail on the wall, which she would have been incapable of reaching from the bed. Billie Holiday was arrested and 2 officers were stationed at her door. She starts to go through heroin withdrawal, and her friends had a doctor come and prescribe her methadone. However, as part of Harry Anslinger's policy, methadone was stopped after 10 days and her condition worsened. They even fingerprinted her and took her mugshot while she lay dying in her hospital bed. Billie Holiday died approximately 1.5 months after entering the hospital, and it can be argued that the government directly did so by ordering the methadone to be stopped and forcing her already weakened and emaciating body to face the rigors of withdrawal without assistance. Indirectly, though, it seems that authorities at least sped up her journey into self-destruction that ultimately led to her death. It seems to reason that she would not have sunken so far so soon had she not been prohibited from singing in jazz clubs and been stripped of her passion, leaving her only with addiction. Was the government out to destroy Billie Holiday? Absolutely, but it was fictionalized somewhat in the movie. The film imagines discussions between federal agents, and they come off as caricatures of bad guys as they talk about how they're trying to take down Holiday. Agents wouldn't have talked like that. They would have mistakenly believed that they were the good guys and would not have realized that they were on the wrong side of history. The movie attempts to make the same points of Johann Hari's book, Chasing the Scream, that the war on drugs does not start out with good intentions. It was actually a war on minorities, and drugs was used as a justification to target them and assert greater control over their lives. Billie Holiday was just the greatest example of this. Thank y'all for listening. I'm Country Boy from One Mic Black History, and this has been Hollywood versus Black History. If you like this, you enjoy this, you can find me at onemichistory.com. And if you want to support the podcast, please consider donating to my Patreon page or buy me coffee. Also, give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, and peace.